anyone brings up that a game needs a remake, they usually say that because the game is flawed in some way, whether that be a failure to deliver on the game's promise, or the game is outdated and needs to be brought up to modern standards. Does Dragon Age Origins demonstrate any of those flaws? Well, I'd argue that the game kept its promise and isn't outdated, but there is some truth to those points. So how has the game failed to deliver on its promise? Well, what did the game promise? It promised a world with deep lore, rich characters, better isometric RPG gameplay, and choices that mattered. Did Dragon Age Origins fail in any of those areas? If you ask certain isometric RPG fans, they'll tell you that Dragon Age Origins failed as a successor to Baldur's Gate, because it either lacked the complexity or essence on what made Baldur's Gate so great. How true is this? I can't say it isn't. Dragon Age Origins and Baldur's Gate, while similar in many ways, differ in key areas. Dragon Age Origins is far more cinematic and streamlined than Baldur's Gate. The emphasis is placed less on mechanics, as Dragon Age Origins simplified those to be easier to understand, and made the game more cinematic. But as I see it, I have no issue with it. And when it comes to fans of Dragon Age and not fans of the genre as a whole, Dragon Age Origins has definitely delivered on its promise. It has deep lore that portrays how the real world works. The Chantry may be right in some areas, but are biased overall. Magic isn't inherently evil, and Andraste would take issue with the treatment of mages, creating the sense that what you are told isn't the full story. It definitely delivered on rich characters, as any discussion of the game will inevitably talk about how much joy people get interacting with the companions. Better isometric RPG gameplay? Most would say yes, as it would took what seemed to be like an archaic and hard to understand system and made it into something that most people can get the gist of in an hour. To bring it back to Baldur's Gate, that was far more difficult for most people to understand unless you were already knee-deep in the genre. But Dragon Age Origins made it easier to understand what you were doing and how you can do what you can do with the system. Now, most people would disagree with me on this, but did your choices matter in Dragon Age Origins? When people say choices should matter, many people think they should affect the direction and ending the story takes. If you make enough wrong choices, you can just fail. But with Dragon Age Origins, the choices matter in how they influence the journey and not the end. You will, regardless of what you do, have all four factions on your side. But the difference is who will be helping you in the end. Did you make a deal with the werewolves? Then they will join you. Did you kill all the mages in the Mage Tower? Then the Templars will join you. Nothing really changes except for how you want the journey to be. The Archdemon will die regardless, by Alistair's, Logain's, or your hand. Other choices like deciding who is the King of Orzammar doesn't matter. All those choices gesture at a grander changes down the line, and you will never see that. All it really does is affect how the journey plays out. Knowing there is one particular choice that does change the ending, and that it's whether or not you do the Dark Ritual. But that is one choice out of many, and I don't think that single choice suddenly makes all choices matter. So then, should Dragon Age Origins be remade so that they can see the full consequences of those actions? Well, the choices that are offered can't have us see the consequences of them, because it would require the game to find a valid reason to go back to those areas and see the changes, which can be difficult to do without it coming across as, see, stuff changed. It's peeling the back of the curtain, making you realize you were playing a game. Because at the end of Dragon Age Origins, what are the reasons to go back and visit those areas? After a few years of rebuilding, the Wardens visiting those areas seems reasonable, but playing through it doesn't have any greater reason beyond just showing you. Which for some, and myself, would be fine, but there are issues with that. Additionally, you can't change or show choices because of the sequels. It will create continuity problems. Now, most Dragon Age Origins fans would probably be fine with invalidating the existence of the later games for different reasons, but I'll get back to that line of thought later. By and large, most people would agree that Dragon Age Origins did deliver on its promise, and it did it well. But while it may have delivered, is what it delivered outdated? Well, what would be considered outdated in Dragon Age Origins? Now, I will be talking about what others have said about the game, because personally, I don't think Dragon Age Origins is outdated at all. The most you could use is an art style and graphics update for me, but even then, I don't think it looks that bad. People have said that gameplay and certain quests feel outdated. More modern fans of the RPGs and Dragon Age say the gameplay is too stiff and janky. The lack of response makes the game worse. Moving your character in combat, engaging and disengaging feels off, missing enemies and the general feel. The issues isn't the gameplay itself, but rather the feel of it. While I don't agree with the entirely, I see how people feel like that. So the solution for those people is to modernize the combat to either improve the basic combat or make it more in line with the later games. By doing that, the latter would make it less of a faithful remake to the original, while the former really isn't needed. Unlike older games like Baldur's Gate, Dragon Age Origins isn't that hard to get a grasp on. In quite frank starkness to the rest of the genre, it's actually a lot understandable than other games. The amount of effort you have to put in to learn the gameplay is less than even modern RPGs like Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous or Divinity Original Sin 2. So what you use would be remaking the combat to enhance it, where most it could do is just fix some bugs. There's not a lot you can add to it or fix. Additionally, most and myself, fans don't play Dragon Age Origins or the series Dragon Age for the gameplay. We play it for the world, characters and story. So the gameplay being outdated isn't much of an issue for others because of what we play the game for. But what about updating some quests? Some members in the community have voiced issues with the Dragon Age Origins handling of sexual assault for a couple of reasons. One, the game doesn't handle the themes well, as it seems to use them for shock value. Now, I do disagree with that, as I feel the sexual assault wasn't used for shock value. It was used to illustrate the issues that many groups in Thedas face, and the characters that were affected didn't become irrelevant, didn't become iceboxed. They still participated in the main story and being mentioned in the epilogue slides. I am aware that this is a sensitive subject, and whether or not it is done well still makes people uncomfortable, and I do see where they are coming from, even though I disagree. Changing the quests to be more careful and mindful of what is happening is reasonable. The second point is one I agree with a lot more. Is Dragon Age portrayals of the world isn't similar to our world, particularly in gender politics. In the first game, it shows that both men and women occupy roles of power. It outright states in character creation that men and women are generally regarded as equals. You could also argue that women hold more power overall, as they are the ones who can ascend up the ranks of the Chantry, the biggest institution of the world. In our real-world history, men being the ones who could be the religious figures influence the dynamic between men and women. So, from all of that, it is strange that men aren't also harassed at the same rate as women. Why would the game suggest this equality but fall back on these stereotypes? It continues this odd trend that suggests that men can't be sexually assaulted. In later games, they do suggest that the setting of Dragon Age Origins Ferelden seems to find same-sex relationships strange. That is information after Dragon Age Origins, because we have in Dragon Age Origins no comparison to how other nations view gender politics and whatnot. This isn't just isolated to gender politics, but to many things. So they could remake those quests to be more representative of what the game tells us the world is like. But as you can see, the reasons to remake Dragon Age Origins are few, and the cases for them aren't as strong as one might think. So to answer the question, I don't think Dragon Age Origins needs a remake. The most it could do is fix some bugs and issues, and make the graphics and art style look better. Personally, I don't think Dragon Age Origins needs a remake, but I do know many people who would love a remake, even if all it did was a graphics update. But remember when I mentioned that Dragon Age Origins fans wouldn't be bothered in validating the existence of Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition? That line of thought does bring up an interesting question. What if Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition get remade in the style of Dragon Age Origins, basically a full-fledged remake of the series? And while we're at it, let's also discuss if Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition need a remake. Now, the likelihood of a full remake of the series done in the same way of Dragon Age Origins isn't going to happen for a number of reasons. But I think it can show what sort of changes the two would go through if done the same way as Dragon Age Origins, and will show what Dragon Age Origins fans value as what they like. So these will be more broad changes and nothing specific to delve any deeper would take us too long, and getting technical isn't needed. The biggest change would be the gameplay. as both games would basically be Dragon Age Origins, but again, the level designs, enemy encounter, gear progression, and abilities would all change. The only difference I can think that would be is adding extra talents and spells depending on the game. Like in Dragon Age Inquisition, I imagine the specialization for Rift Mage will be present, either adding or replacing other specializations. They could also rework some specializations like Shapeshifter to be more useful, because that wasn't really the most useful specialization in Dragon Age Origins. Increasing the enemy variety in all games, Dragon Age Origins' core gameplay doesn't need to be drastically changed at all, so there isn't much worth digging in there, because fundamentally Dragon Age Origins gameplay is as solid as it comes. A lot of modern isometric RPGs don't really have the same feel as Dragon Age Origins because of how not only the control scheme works, but also just how friendly it is to newcomers. The second biggest change would be the protagonist. As the protagonist influenced Dragon Age 2 dramatically and somewhat to Dragon Age Inquisition, but less so. With Dragon Age 2, they would basically have to rewrite the whole story, as it would not function at all without Hawke. Dragon Age 2 was made specifically in mind with the voice protagonist, and so nearly all of its story will have to go. I can't imagine how the rewrite would go, but I know the changes that will be made will be so substantial that it would not be a Dragon Age 2 anymore. The only elements I think that would remain would be anything relating to Dragon Age Inquisition, the Mage-Templar conflict, and Corypheus. Dragon Age Inquisition change would simply be making the protagonist silent. Everything else would remain the same, as Dragon Age Inquisition's story isn't really about the Inquisitor, but rather the choices they make, like in Dragon Age Origins. The art style across the two games would just be Dragon Age Origins, then just add some Origins prologues, get rid of the dialogue wheel, and add more options, and then you're all good. What is interesting about the idea of remaking Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition is showing each game how it would change, with Dragon Age 2 changing so much and Dragon Age Inquisition changing very little. Dragon Age 2 probably needs a remake more than Dragon Age Origins or Dragon Age Inquisition. What Dragon Age 2 needs to do to fix the huge amount of reused level assets and make enemy encounters better. Like, no joke, I believe that you go through the same cave level like 20 times throughout the entire game, and you go into the same warehouse just as often. Any remake of Dragon Age 2 should increase the variety of places you go to. More variations in map design will make not only the story more impactful, but will show that Kirkwall isn't just this small place. Denerim feels like a city even though you don't see a lot of it, while Kirkwall doesn't. Then there are the enemy encounters, which could have been made better if they were just pre-placed instead of having hordes of enemies that constantly repel down to you. Or have the repelling down make more sense, like they just wander in through the alleyway and not just repelling down the rooftops. That also will help. Not only is this a bit immersion breaking, but it can cause gameplay to suffer, because knowing how many and what enemies you are fighting is important, as it allows you to know what you should do, who to prioritize, and what companions should do. You don't know what types of enemies there are or how long the waves will last. You do what Dragon Age Origins did, and that would be a lot better, and make it more immersive. And that is it. Dragon Age 2 may not have fulfilled its promise as a sequel to Dragon Age Origins, but it did fulfill out what it set out to do, and it isn't outdated by any means. The only thing I can think of that should be changes some story decisions. Like, I want Orsino not to betray you when you side with the mages, but I think that changes too little and will cause many continuity issues. Same goes for any story changes. It can't be done without causing issues. Dragon Age 2, out of the three games, in my eyes, needs a remake more because it is these smaller things like Rio's assets that bring down it in many people's eyes. Now, a faithful remake of Dragon Age 2 won't change the perception of the game, but it will allow it to better show what it is. Also, if a remake does occur, they should change the name from Dragon Age 2 to something else like Dragon Age Exodus or Kirkwall. It better reflects what the game is and separates itself from Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age Inquisition in a ranking would be below Dragon Age 2 but above Dragon Age Origins, for the simple reason that the remake could act as expanding on lost opportunities that would enhance the experience rather than detracting from it. Like reintroducing the cinematic dialogue scenes across the board, to me that was the biggest detriment to the game, because it felt a lot more impersonable when you just had a floating camera next to your character instead of having a more scripted and curated scene that could have you talking with these other characters. The best moments within Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age in general and Dragon Age 2 all these very curated cutscenes when you get to talk face to face with other people. Origins would have, in my opinion, less of an effect if the cinematics were removed. The best moments in Dragon Age Inquisition are those moments where the story and the characters are given these cinematic moments. Corypheus' intro was made better with the cinematics and made him such an impressionable character before he disappeared for the entire game, but we'll get back to that. The cinematics play a huge role in making you connect more with the companion characters and story than a traditional dialogue box. It made a lot of the less important, more bog standard quests in Dragon Age Origins and 2 better because of the cinematics. Now back to Corypheus. The only thing I can think of that could be added without changing the story too much is adding more cinematics where we can see what Corypheus is doing, so we can feel like he's more present within the story. Dragon Age Origins had you see what Loghain was up to and what he was doing. It isn't a lot, but it helps him make him feel a lot more of a part of the story than he actually is. You never interact with him more than 4 times unless you recruit him, but those cinematics ensure that you don't forget he exists or that he is against you. It keeps you aware of that, of what is going on in the story. Giving Corypheus more cinematics will go a long way to make him feel like he's an actual antagonist than just a guy you met that one time who's a bit mad at you. He is the main hurdle you will overcome, and doesn't feel like that because he doesn't show up that often. And it's not like the game doesn't give the player anything about Corypheus, it's just that the mission to know more about him is buried under a war table mission. A remake could make it so that when you complete a main quest after like Champion of the Just or In the Hushed Whispers, you'll get a cutscene of what Corypheus is doing and how he's reacting to your progress. It's not like he needs a rewrite as all of his dialogue is really amazing. The issue is the lack of his presence. War table missions are a great addition, but fail in making the Inquisition feel like an international force. Reading through them shows a lot of interesting ideas and storylines that should be playable. What I think is the solution, they should make the war table missions playable. Now, how should this kind of remake go about? Well, the easiest way to do this is not play as the Inquisitor, but as other characters. For example, who you play as should make sense with the mission in question. Like, let's say for example, if the mission is from the player's backstory, you play as them. For example, if you play as an elf, your backstory is that you're a Dalish elf sent to observe the conclave between the Templars and Mages and see what's going to happen and keep your keeper informed. So when you get asked to help protect your clan, you should play a mission as either a clan member or an Inquisition agent. Nothing too big. Just a little gameplay segment that is 10 to 30 minutes long so that you can get the feel of the Inquisition's power and influence, but also experience these stories to make them more impactful. It makes the war table missions matter and mean a lot more. Now, I don't think every war table mission should be playable, because a lot of them are just you asking Liliana to investigate something. That doesn't really need to be playable, but missions involving the Inquisitor's backstory or a faction like the Wardens should be playable. There are tons of great content within the war table missions that are just glossed over because most people aren't going to go do them or read about them, which really sucks. In the open world, you can establish camps that allow you to see the Inquisition on the ground, which is cool because it makes the Inquisition feel like a present force rather than just some dudes, but it can go farther than that. Seeing your men around key points and seeing the camps get bigger and bigger than just 2 tents. Enemies in the area should spawn less frequently to show that the Inquisition is having an effect on the world. Seeing physical progress makes the Inquisition the force it says it is. As for the open world, I don't think they can change them without changing a lot of the other connected parts, like the story. And I do get a lot of people don't really like the open world of Dragon Age Inquisition, but again, I don't think there is a lot that can be changed there without changing a lot of the story parts, as I said before. And the most they can do is maybe reposition some stuff around the maps, like make the hinterlands a bit more bearable, maybe a tiny bit smaller, but I don't think they can really get rid of the open worlds as a whole, because it would, in my opinion, be too much of a change. Speaking of story, I don't think they can change that either, as I've said before, because it would create continuity issues that can't be resolved without making a full series remake. But maybe make the time travel stuff not time travel stuff. I'm not really a big fan of that. Maybe they could just say, oh yeah, like, it's already time travel, it's like reality manipulation, which I think is a lot more better and understandable. That will obviously make the segment of going into the future a bit weird, but I think they can do that. I don't know. I think it's possible. I just don't particularly like time travel and what its implications is, even if it's very limited. I don't want time travel to be a thing in Dragon Age. The next thing a remake could do is tone down the requirements of certain fetch quests, like collecting shards. Instead of collecting, a million shards to open a door, how about you collect like 2 shards and you can open a door, or make 1 shard pick up the equivalent to like 5 shards. So the amount of effort required is more in line with the player's expectations on how much the effort they should put into it. I imagine collecting shards would feel a lot better if you didn't have to do it so often and have to get so many. It'll turn from a more shards, my favorite part of the game, to a cool, I did it, now I get to get some buffs in the Forbidden Oasis. Because the issue with fetch quests isn't that they exist, Dragon Age Origins has them. It is that the amount of effort the game is asking you to put in for something that doesn't give all that much. Now, not every fetch quest could lower its requirements or make it faster to meet those requirements, like the Astranium's quests. In that case, the remake should just make getting to them a lot easier. Gameplay, I think, is fine. In Dragon Age Inquisition, it doesn't really need to be remade. Others would say it should be remade, but I don't think it needs to be remade. The gameplay is fine as is. The most they can do is make the feel better. It can feel a bit stiff and the controls could be better. Like, it could take more inspiration for how Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2 did their control schemes and how that worked, because it does feel a bit odd to play on a keyboard and mouse than a controller. Now, it may seem that there is a lot more to remake in Dragon Age Inquisition than the other 2 games, but that is simply because the issue with Dragon Age Inquisition is more of not taking the opportunity that presented itself rather than having some shortcomings, like with Dragon Age 2 or Dragon Age Origins Age. Dragon Age Inquisition has a lot of great stuff, and it can be a lot better if it were just expanded upon. I think Dragon Age Inquisition is a really well done game, whose issues are a lack of polish and not taking the opportunity that could improve the game, like cinematic presentation and making war table missions playable. Obviously, I do think a lot of people would disagree with what I have said here, and that's fine. I do think it is an interesting question to answer on whether Dragon Age Origins or 2 or Inquisition need a remake. And to finish it off, I do think there's a lot of issues with each of the games, and I'll admit to a lot of those issues, but to me, there's nothing that has seriously rubbed me the wrong way with each game, because each game has fulfilled its promise of what I want, which is it's a cinematic RPG with great characters, and that's what I like a lot about them, and the games don't really need to change because of that. A lot of people will probably say I should have mentioned companions and remaking them, because a lot of people don't like Dragon Age Inquisition's companions for some reason, and it's whatever, but like, I don't think they need to change that, because it makes sense for what they are. The game made a promise that what the companions in Dragon Age Inquisition will be are different from Dragon Age Origins or 2. It has to be different, because it's a different sort of tone, setting, and story than Dragon Age Origins or 2.